There's still no state budget, but a summit may happen in mid-November. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state government, sometimes the federal government, and how it just might affect your life. Some lives are being affected these days with this ongoing state budget impasse. Here to talk about it, a couple of people who watch this stuff carefully. Kent Redfield is back, Professor Emeritus of Political Science, University of Illinois, Springfield. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
Who is busier in retirement than when he was actually, no, that's right, he's always busy. And Bruce Rushton, reporter with the weekly Illinois Times here in Springfield.
Thanks for having me.
Bruce, welcome back. Okay, let's, there's supposed to be what some people, at least a meeting, you can call it a summit if you want, but I'm not sure if with all of the way it's being talked about, it's going to be some so-called do-gooder groups, including the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform and the Better Government Association, League of Women Voters among them, 6 altogether, sent a letter to the governor, the 4 leaders of the legislative caucuses who have not met, we believe, in one place since May. And the end of May, they were supposed to do a budget, and the new fiscal year started July 1st, and we still have no budget. They proposed a meeting, and then the responses have basically been, I think everybody said they're going. The governor said, okay, I'll take control of where it'll be. It'll probably be in a governor's office, maybe Chicago, maybe Springfield, on November 18th. So we're still more than 2 weeks away. Will this help? Is this going to help solve the budget crisis that we have in Illinois?
If they lock the door and don't open it again until we see a white puff of smoke from the chimney. I mean, they've talked about making this a public process.
Right, or at least perhaps having it on like live streaming. We don't know about TV. We don't know if reporters would be involved. We don't think the public will be involved. None of these things have yet been flushed out.
Yeah, I mean.
But if the governor sets the agenda, he may want to, I think he talked about structural reform when he says that is basically cutting back on at least local communities' need for collective bargaining and unions. That's going against the core values of the Democrats. That's why we have this impasse, I think.
Yeah, and the reform groups followed up by saying we need a bipartisan agenda, and which means we need to talk about the budget and the turnaround. And you really can chew gum and walk at the same time. We actually could talk about some things to fix the business climate as while we were talking about a budget, but everybody is, painted themselves into a corner. This is so strange. This is, if in normal times, if you had a reform good government groups trying to set up a meeting between the legislative leaders and the governor, everybody would have gone, what? What is this?
Why do they need to do it?
Yeah, and why? And normally you have tough negotiations in private, and then a public meeting, an announcement to say, here's what we've agreed to. And this is, so it's backwards and upside down, but it's, somehow that makes sense in the current budget climate and in this stalemate.
Well, I think you said it exactly right. Painted themselves into a corner. Given the public stances that these folks have carved out, I mean, I just find it very difficult to believe that there's going to be any sort of a solution coming out of this so-called summit meeting, if in fact it occurs. Somebody has to give, and if they give, then that's going to be seen, and perhaps likely, as a sign of weakness. And what I don't see, maybe I'm missing things here, but I don't see a huge pack of folks getting behind Rauner saying go, go, go. I mean,
well, he certainly says he hears that from hundreds of business people, et cetera. Todd Meisch, the head of the State Chamber of Commerce, based in Springfield, just this week, I don't know if it was a letter.
He said, hang in there, Governor.
He said, hang in there.
But he also said, a key sentence in there was, we need to keep personalities out of this. And I think that was a direct rebuke to the governor, who has called, as much as called Madigan a shyster or a crook or a conflict of interest sort of person.
Well, it's been a little while since he said that stuff.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
like right at the end of the session when he ran $800,000 worth of ads against Madigan. But
certainly. I mean, but you've got folks like the Civic Federation, for example, which is,
in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. they have not gotten behind this per se as much as they have, like, fix the tax code, get some financial stuff together. Yeah, I mean, you're correct, the Chamber of Commerce, but that seems to me to be, what other examples do we have of a large groundswell of support other than what Rauner tells us he hears from folks and this statement from the Chamber guy?
Yeah, and if they talk about talking, in the sense that the Democrats talk about some of the budget, the turnaround, the economic climate items, and the governor will talk a little bit about the budget, that would have to be a little bit of movement compared to where we're at. So, I mean, that's the best case scenario. Scenario that I can come up with is that they would start to be moving towards at least having these discussions that they need to have.
Okay, as we have noted many times on this program, since the new fiscal year began, which was July 1st, and I guess this is the longest in probably the 40 years you've been watching this stuff,
yes,
that the state is without a budget. On the other hand, state employees are being paid. 90% of the state budget under last year's numbers, basically, under last year's budget, are still being paid under court order or things like them. That's how state employees are being paid. That's why not everyone sees the crisis and why the state is able to function this way. And yet social service agencies keep closing their doors. And one wonders how long this can go on. There was some more collateral damage in the last few days. Credit ratings were for 6 state universities dropped. Mm-hmm. So the state has had a couple of credit rating drops from a couple of agencies, and so the credit ratings dropped at Eastern Illinois, Northern Illinois, Western Illinois, Governor State University, Southern Illinois, and Northeastern Illinois University, which is in the city of Chicago, which means it would be harder for those places to borrow money. The rating agency says with the ongoing state budget impasse, it doesn't look like they may get their money because there has been no higher education budget passed. Another reason that this has all been able to go on is the governor signed just one part of the budget the Democrats passed this year. It was for K through 12 education. Schools could open in your neighborhood, your K through the primary and high schools. But universities and community colleges, there is no new money, so they're using reserves or they're using like last year's payments that they got late, and then we don't know what's going to happen next semester. So how long can this go on, people?
I think it can go on, and it will go on. Everybody's saying, Rauner is saying, well, look for January, because then a simple majority, we can pass a budget in January. I don't understand why there's optimism that would be passed in January. Why couldn't we? I mean, in this
of course, right now it takes, 3/5 in the current year, but as of January, it only would take
to pass something that has an immediate effective date, which is what you need for a budget.
So the extraordinary majority of Democrats who haven't been able to override the governor on some things could pass things. But will the Democrats, I guess, Bruce, the question is, what you're saying, trust the governor to spend the money as they say, or will he just veto it again?
Yeah, I mean, he could just veto it again. I mean, they did pass a budget. They did pass an enabling legislation to allow a budget, and they passed that last summer, and look where we're at. I mean, because the governor said no. And at this point in time, it seems to me that the personality differences, the gulf is so wide that, I mean, would they trust him to spend the money even if they passed a budget in a way that they, said you should spend the money?
And of course, they did pass it with somewhere between a $3 and $4 billion gap.
Correct.
Saying we need new revenue, we need to work with the governor on this. Mm-hmm. And this is the impasse because he says he will not agree to the new revenue, even though he's open to it, without these other reforms in term limits, remap reform, court case lawsuit reform, workers' compensation, property tax relief, with an erosion allowing local governments not to collectively bargain with their employees.
And what happens next fall? It's an election year. And so the time to fix that, fix these structural reforms, it was this, they've lost an opportunity here because nobody's going to want to take on these issues. It's going to be very much more difficult, I think, to handle these issues in a responsible way during an election year. I mean, could we be having the budget impasse as a campaign issue come next fall? I don't think that's an impossible thing.
Sure sounds like it.
Yeah,
I think the governor
certainly the damage from it.
The damage from it, but I mean, why couldn't? I mean, I'm not hearing anybody say there's a concrete reason why we would have to have a budget in place before the next November 16 elections.
Well, I think this is a house of cards that is going to collapse, and so
because we're taking in like $5 billion less than we're spending.
Yeah, we're
for this
running
12-month
up
period.
these bills, but also yes, people are coming to agencies and they're working, but they have no operating budgets. They can't fix things. They can't buy commodities. They can't buy equipment. Vendors are starting to cut off the states selectively. But if you're downstate, then and your biggest contract is a state facility, you don't have other places to go. And if if that's your biggest contract and you're not getting paid, you can't take your business outward. You can't take on something else. And so cumulatively this will have an effect. I think everybody realizes that, but nobody's willing to make the first move. Now, there is some optimism that once we get past the deadline for filing in primaries, then people will know whether or not they've got a primary opponent. That might give some people some backbone.
But what does backbone mean? Of course, I mean, it sounds like you're saying, well, maybe they'll vote against the governor, but then, of course,
or Democrats against the speaker. But again, I don't think those are likely.
Right.
I think you're going to have to get an agreement that ends up putting Democrats on bills they don't like and Republicans on bills that they don't like. This is the way you have to get things done.
Traditionally in Illinois.
Well, if you're doing this tasteful thing. The governor acts like the Democrats are dying to vote for a tax increase. They don't want to vote for a tax increase. They want to put as few Democrats as possible on a tax increase and as many Republicans as possible. And the same thing's true with, some of these items on the turnaround agenda. So, it will collapse eventually. I mean, there's no question about it. And, schools are open, but if we get so far behind on our cash flow situation, the only way to pay the bills, the court orders, may be, in fact, to short the schools on their school aid payments in the spring.
Right. Yeah, they have only paid a certain percentage in the past when they haven't had enough money.
Well, I mean, you bring up higher ed. I mean, the leaders of the universities went to Rauner last week, had a meeting saying, hey, we're in deep doo-doo here. I mean, this is a huge crisis for us. I mean, they said it directly and plainly is what's been reported. And what happened?
So far, nothing?
Nothing, nothing. Yeah. And so these are smart people. And so, these are people who aren't kidding around. And so if you can bring that number of smart people into a room and directly say, hey, we got a crisis going on, and nothing happens, you're right, eventually it will collapse. But what is eventually? Yeah. Everybody's been saying the same thing for more than a year. It's going to take giving on both sides to move forward, and there's been no giving.
Yeah, when you bring up higher education, and in the recent interview that former Governor Jim Edgar gave, he said that higher education is one of the things business people look at Illinois and say, we want a stable economy, we want stability, and we want a good higher education system, and that's in jeopardy now because you might get good people leaving or not coming to Illinois in the midst of this chaos. And yet, when Governor Rauner was asked about that, and also Jim Thompson, former governor, saying, he's never seen Illinois in as bad a shape it is, even though he wasn't casting blame, Governor Rauner's response is, well, I don't criticize those past governors and the things they did to get us here, but we're on track, apparently.
On track to where? I mean,
I guess that's the question.
Well, I mean,
those arguments don't seem to be catching hold, certainly not in the governor's office.
No, and I think, you're right. They want higher education. Business wants a good higher education system. But the other thing I think business wants as much, if not more, is certainty. And this future perhaps has never been more uncertain than it is today, at least if we're to listen to folks like former Governor Edgar and former Governor Thompson. I mean, you have no idea. Business wanting to come to Illinois has no idea what the economic and fiscal future holds.
And what winning means at this point is not clear. I mean, you say one side or the other is going to win. I'm not sure there's going to be anything left to win.
Interesting.
I mean, we destroyed the social service non-for-profit network structure. It will take years to rebuild.
You think we're already there?
Oh, certainly.
I mean, some have laid off people, and some have cut back hours, and some have closed. But most are still operating, aren't they?
Yeah, but if you turn the money back on tomorrow in order to get it up completely functioning, it's going to take a while, and I don't think we're turning the money back on tomorrow.
Yeah, well, and obviously there are some high-profile things like the State Museum that closed in Springfield and satellite places in 4 other cities. And the top people have retired because they were forced to leave. Yeah. And even though the union employees are still working, the doors are closed to the public, and they could lose their accreditation from a national organization.
And if you turn the money on tomorrow, it would take a decade to get it back to where you could reaccredit it.
As long as one more problem, and maybe there'll be something bright here.
I'm not sure.
But a group called Voices for Illinois Children came out last week. They were showing a study that shows, I don't know if a lot of people knew before this whole crisis that one of the things the state does is it provides, and I guess it was part of welfare reform, help for low-income people to get child care so that they can, like a single mother or father can go get a job and get assistance with child care. Well, Illinois, under regulations put forward by the Rauner administration, is now the lowest eligibility level in the whole country. So if you're a family of three, if I read the chart correctly, in Illinois, and if you make more than $838 a month, you can't get child care, and that's less than half of any other state, and it's less than the poverty level. So that just is adding to kind of the dismay that people feel about what's going on with state government.
Yeah, and this was done by regulation. I mean, it does obviously cut the amount that we have to spend on of the money we don't have on providing money for child care. But this was an executive action taken by the governor. It wasn't and so we're finding other things we spend money on, but here we've cut back eligibility, and this is basic. If you want economic development, you want people with jobs and spending money and growth, then you help them in ways, so that they can afford to work. If you have a job that doesn't pay enough for you to afford health care or child care, then you're going to quit your job and you're going to end up in an entitlement program and costing the state money. I mean, this is Democrat and even more than Democrat, Republican, welfare reform and how we grow the economy.
Get people back to
and
work.
So this is just, it is completely upside down.
But when the governor makes public appearances, and as the Voices for Illinois Children person noticed, her name is Miller, I think, but when the governor makes appearances, he says, I hate it that people are not getting the services they need, and he basically says it's the Democrats' fault. So
I hate that this village is burning while I'm trying to save it. That's essentially what he's saying, and it's getting harder and harder to at least personally, I'm not seeing, as I said, the groundswell of folks. I'm not seeing, for one thing, he's stopped wearing Carhartt as much as he used to, and I think that's a step in the right direction. He
doesn't often wear a tie, but not that I notice sartorial things.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
but that's the only progress I'm seeing, to some extent, and he just seems as ideologically driven as any public official I've ever come across.
Well, let's talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, but we also, you don't give the Democrats a pass on this because it is, we have serious problems that have made the business climate in Illinois unattractive. And there are things that we could do to promote business, and there are changes that can be made in workers' comp. There are changes that can be made in tort reform. We can do things without, that are, and the legislature in the past has done things to restrict collective bargaining for public employees.
Right, which the governor points out. Particularly, they did it in Chicago. It's not the state of Chicago, so all local government should be, although those were agreed to by unions.
So there were deals to be done. And the Democrats are going to have to come to the table and talk about economic development and business reform. And so, right now, they don't want to see this happen, but they're hoping the pressure builds up on the governor. The governor is hoping the pressure builds up on the Democrats, and meanwhile, everybody is suffering. So, getting these people together in a room just all of a sudden seems like a big deal, which is just tells you how bad it is.
Well, that's a good point. The Democrats did create these problems, but right now I think that they're starting to look at who's going to have the best campaign commercials. And I think the optics are looking worse for Rauner than they are for the Democrats. He is the governor. He said, I'm going to turn around things midway through his term. If we're still where we're at come the fall, he's going to own this. And they're going to have all kinds of hit pieces. Your interview with Governor Edgar. That's not going to look good. How many flyers is that going to come out?
Yeah, he said he said Rauner should quit holding the state hostage to his list of demands.
Exactly,
which was pretty strong stuff from a former governor who campaigned right up to the end to help get Governor Rauner
Absolutely,
elected.
He's jumped ship.
Yeah, interesting. One thing. Brian Mackey is one of our colleagues. He used to work for the newspaper, works for public radio and Illinois Issues. Somehow found some video of the governor at a 2012 conference in Chicago at the George W. Bush Institute talking about tax policy in various states. And the governor talked about the need for reforming Illinois' business climate and talked about how we could have a wedge issue against the Democrats. He actually used the words wedge issue with social services that people want versus the power of special interests, which was clearly talking about governmental unions. And it seems like that's kind of where we are, that we now have, he seems to be giving the Democrats a choice. You want your union friends to be paid, and he talked about how overpaid government workers were and union bosses and stuff, versus the social services that people need, which is weird because he also talks now about how he really doesn't like these cuts that people are seeing.
And he likes unions too. He just doesn't like the union bosses. It doesn't seem to me to be a classic wedge issue. I mean, I think he's who knows? I mean, we'll find out. But I think there's just as much chance he's angering both folks equally. I mean, I don't see any signs really of the social services folks getting mad at the unions or vice versa. I think all their anger is directed at the governor's mansion right now. I don't see them being divided.
We will see where it goes. Bruce, you have been involved in trying to get some information from the governor's office and kind of famously have sued, I guess personally and through Illinois Times, to try to get unredacted versions of the governor's schedule to know who he's been meeting with. What's the latest on that stuff?
Well, he just has hired a private law firm, Brown Hay Stevens, to fight my FOIA lawsuit. So rather than just turn over the records after he gets an opinion from the Attorney General saying they're public records after being sued, he's apparently decided to dig in and fight. So we don't have money to pay for child care, we don't have money to pay for lawyers to keep secrets. Furthermore, on October 19th, I made a FOIA request, real simple records request to the governor's office. Give me any document that shows Bruce Rauner's email address. On Monday, I got an answer back. The 5 days was up, and they said, well, we need another 5 days. We need a 5-day extension to produce that document.
And the reason?
Well, there are 5 reasons under the law that you can invoke a 5-day extension. So I said, what's the reason? And they said, we were unable to locate the record during the course of a routine search. Now that's not the reason I would have chose, but that's the one they picked. And so they owe me an answer now on Monday, and we'll see what it's going to be. But I've been unable to find any sign that Bruce Rauner has an email address. When I go bruce.rauner@illinois.gov, it bounces back. And so that's not it, unlike most other state employees. And so I'm very interested to know what email address he's been using.
Interesting. Well, as I know from when I worked with you at our paper, if there was a FOIA thing and you were after me on it, I wouldn't want you after me on it. That's all.
You would probably give me the answer.
Well, I would try to be cooperative.
Yeah, and if there is a private email address, then you would think, given what's been going on at the national level with, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, that you would think, well, maybe this is something we don't want to get involved with. But
yeah, well, my guess is Bruce Rauner, has people around him who brief him. I think he has expressed to people he's, doesn't read all that much of the daily news. He sees headlines and he's happy with that. I read that in something Rich Miller of Capital Facts wrote once.
So, I don't believe that the speaker has an email account or a cell phone, one of the two, and the message. It's kind of like Goodfellas, where they talk on the payphone, then run across the street to tell Paulie what's going on, and then go back to the payphone.
Speaking of speakers and going briefly into the federal dimension that I sometimes lead into the show. Former Speaker Denny Hastert, who I know back from when he was a state representative in Illinois, and he rose to one of the highest offices in the land, pleaded guilty this week to breaking banking laws. He was paying apparently hush money to somebody that he was coaching as a wrestling coach back in Yorkville, before he ever got into politics. And he lied to the FBI when they asked him why he was taking out this money. How sad is this? Because he was one of the Illinois heroes, one of the good guys.
Yeah, no, a personal tragedy certainly for the victim, and the end, a very bad ending to what had been a pretty spectacular career in government, rising from, high school wrestling coach to third in line to the presidency. Yeah. So, and it also, it does tell you about the American criminal justice system. I mean, he's being prosecuted for essentially, violating credit money exchange laws, but there's an underlying illegal act that they can't prosecute him for. And so, is he being treated unfairly because they can't get him on one thing, they're getting him on another, but he also can afford much better representation than John Q. Citizen can. Is he getting lighter treatment because of that? And so it illustrates kind of the who you are and your circumstances have a big impact on how the American judicial system deals with you.
Yeah, and it looks like if he gets several months in prison, that would be probably the most you're at.
Well, I mean, I think that we should all remember that the duty of the prosecutor isn't to get convictions in America, it's to seek justice. I mean, that's the underlying, that's key underpinning of the judicial system. And they can't, you're right, apparently prosecute him for whatever the underlying act was. But what he is accused of doing deserves some sort of punishment, and so I think probably you're looking at this from afar, and you can't just let him walk free, I think, without being held accountable, and so I think they're being held accountable. It's unfortunate, and we should probably remember somewhere out there there's a person who was probably deserves our sympathy more than Mr. Hastert does.
Interesting. Also on the speaker thing, Paul Ryan of Wisconsin was elected the new Speaker of the House, and certainly for the Springfield of the U.S. House, and Rodney Davis and Darren LaHood, who are the two U.S. House members who represent Springfield, both voted for him. He became kind of the consensus candidate, even though he didn't want to be Speaker. So things are perhaps a little calmer in Washington now.
And we'll see whether anybody in the Illinois delegation moves up. Peter Roskam has had some ambitions. There's a
Adam Kinzinger.
Has
who's sometimes
ambitions.
at odds with the right wing of the party, and he's a former military pilot, so he's on the rise.
It's always good to have your congressman close to power or in power in Washington, D.C., and so we'll see.
And in the brief time we have left, I'm just going to say that this week Springfield laid to rest one of its fathers, Ozzie Langfelder, who had 13 children, was streets commissioner, then was mayor for 2 terms, escaped Austria from the Nazis when he was a youth, and lived the American dream, and his son Jim is now mayor, and his son Josh is now Sangamon County recorder. So quite a life, and it was a very touching service, and it's a great family. With that, Kent Redfield, Bruce Rushton, thanks for your help. Thank you for watching. I hope the state fixes its problems, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.